Obviously, it's meant to happen because otherwise we would not be permanently aroused, which I was constantly. I had to just sit on the tube going from Uxbridge to Harrow or wherever I was going, and the pheromones would be ricocheting around the Piccadilly line. I just couldn't help it. And I was a terrible, terrible flirt, a terrible flirt. And I still am when I get the chance.
Hello, my name is Kay Anderson, and you are listening to Lost Spaces, the podcast that mourns the death of queer nightlife. So every episode, I talk to a different person about a venue from their past, the memories that they created there, and the people that they used to know. So one of the things about drag that I am really fascinated by, and we've probably covered on this show before, is the decision-making process that you have to follow when you are creating your own drag character. Like, who are they? What do they like? What do they not like? What do they wear? What is their favorite color hair? And, all of those kind of details. Because to me, it seems like it's a bit of a big commitment. Like, if things go well, you're kind of stuck with this character for the rest of your life, and you're like forever associated with this person. And so you want to make sure that it's the right decisions that you're making, right? Or am I just overthinking things? I'm probably just overthinking things. Anyway, so this week I got to pick the brains of Ty Jeffries, who is the man behind the drag character Miss Hope Springs, who is this old school, glamorous chanteuse of a drag queen who takes her cues from the old Hollywood starlets of yesteryear. And we got together to talk about Madame JoJos, which was a legendary, and I can't emphasize that enough, a legendary nightclub in London, Soho, that closed in 2014 after being open continuously since the 1960s. So obviously we talk about gentrification and what impact that's having on Soho, which used to be this exciting, gritty place, but is now kind of more like a Disney-fied version of a glamorous, exciting place. We also talk about the decision-making process behind Miss Hope Springs and what it's like to be horny nonstop when you are a teenager. Oh, and I should say that there is one mention in this conversation of Polari. And if you don't know what Polari is already, it is a slang language used predominantly by gay men in the United Kingdom up until about the 1960s, when it started to fall out of favor. Right, that is enough of a history lesson for today. Let's get into the episode.
I left home when I was about 16 and got started then.
Oh, so what do you mean by got started?
Well, started with my independent, autonomous life, which I knew that I was gay and was, out and about being a good gay.
Okay, so what is on the checklist of being a good gay? What's involved?
Well, apart from the obvious cliches, I'm such a cliched gay of a certain age, loving Hollywood, loving old movies, Betty Davis, Joan Crawford, and sneaking off from school to go and watch Garbo at the Everyman Cinema, Garbo's season, and loving Barbra Streisand, Gigi Garland, and Liza Minnelli, of course, and I started painting my face at a very early age, painting their faces on my face.
Oh, interesting. So what's an early age?
Well, that was literally, I think, about 9, 10, 11, probably. Yeah. My sister had a box of Mary Quant crayons. They were makeup, but they were in the form of crayons. And I think she didn't understand why they were getting worn down so quickly. It was because anytime everyone was out of the house, I'd sneak up and I'd do a Merle Oberon or a Garbo or a Dietrich on my face.
So kids, this is the first time I'm going to say kids nowadays in this conversation. It might happen again. I apologize in advance for generalizing about the youth. But kids nowadays kind of have a blueprint, right? Like if they think, oh, I might be homosexual or I might not be heterosexual, I might be queer, they can go online and they can look things up and be like, oh, so this is kind of what the community likes. This is what happens. But in the olden days, and sorry, I should probably do some inverted commas. But before the internet, before there were resources, people just gravitated towards what they liked and didn't necessarily do that because they thought, oh, this is me being a good gay, to borrow your term, or to figure out what my community does. But how do you think everyone ended up landing on very similar things?
That's an interesting point. I do think because it was accessible, it's almost like a secret language. When you, of my age, I'm in my 60s, I have to kill you all now, you know how old I am. It was television, and we had people like Danny LaRue, so we knew that was something different. I mean, I come from a showbiz family, so Danny LaRue was actually a family friend. Oh. And my parents had a lot of gay friends. I had a very strange dynamic because my parents had a lot of gay friends, and yet when it came to me, it was not okay. So there was a real schism there between the two, the acceptance of other gay friends and a gay subculture, because my parents used to use Polari.
Oh, interesting.
Because they were in the theatre and there was a theatre language. So they had a lot of gay friends, but it was my shame and their shame that I was a gay.
And was that something that you found out the hard way, or did you just inherently know that they wouldn't accept you and so you didn't talk about it?
I knew inherently that it was not to be talked about, especially because some of the things my mother would say to me, which were very, very clear shots across the bow, not to talk about it, not to be gay, you better not be,
oh, gosh.
And so that set up a very strange dynamic, although I would sit with them both and watch Garbo and Dietrich and Betty Davis and Joan Crawford movies on Sunday and all the odd musicals. And they enjoyed it hugely, and I absorbed all that like a sort of night storage heater, I suppose. And I was like, this is what I love. I love the music, and I love the costumes and the makeup and the fantasy of it all.
I just have to write down absorbed it like a night storage heater, because I don't know, I've never heard that phrase before, and I'm going to look it up and I'm going to start putting it into my everyday language. But what do you think, when watching those films, what do you think you saw that they didn't see?
I think we were seeing the same things, but I was getting a different current out of it, and maybe a different currency. I was getting my dreams. My dreams were sort of coming to life at that age. The magic, the beauty, the mystery, the fascination with all those Hollywood faces, the dialogue, the photography, the cinematography, which was so beautiful, the music, the songs, I have never really moved on from that. I'm stuck in a sort of Saturday afternoon matinee.
Found your groove, stuck to it.
Yes, that's true, I did.
And so was it that you wanted to be Garbo?
Yes, of course. I mean, who doesn't want to be Garbo? I was fascinated by her, specifically the fact that she retired at the peak of her fame. That really touched something in me. I thought that was absolutely amazing and brave and tragic that such a great artist just stopped and never did what she did so exquisitely ever again. And yet I thought it was majestic of her. So I'm still fascinated by her. And I think I also got the subtext of the women being very, very strong, very, very powerful. The women being paid more in Hollywood than the men at that time, they were the ones with the huge salaries. And they were playing these really fully fleshed out parts. And very often, at a certain time, they'd have a gun and they'd be doing quite a lot of killing people. And they were in a position of power and strength and glamour. And they looked fabulous while they did it, of course.
Are you telling me that you wanted a gun?
Well, I would like a Hollywood gun. A cinematic gun. I have done some photo shoots where I've had a gun to emulate those women's films, the melodramas that Joan Crawford, especially Betty Davis, made. I mean, they very often shot men to great effect, and I kind of approve of it. It's cinematically speaking. Not something I go around doing.
For the subtext it provides, yes.
Yeah, and it's phallic, isn't it? There's a sort of undercurrent of that too.
Yeah, I never shy away from phallic things.
Jolly good.
So there was a weirdness in your relationship with your parents. And did that encourage you to leave home at 16, or do you think that would have happened anyway?
No, I got myself out. I felt the atmosphere was too difficult for me to exist in, like putting a freshwater fish in salt water, it was just not, it was toxic. And I left home as soon as I could and never really went back. I mean, of course I went back to visit, went back to see them as much as I could, but I also took a lot of time out for myself, to be myself, to find a way of being myself without the feeling of being, watched over and judged and criticized.
So let's just quickly go back, because I'm not sure whether we hammered out all of the details of being a good gay. So with your 16-year-old self in mind and this newfound freedom that you have after leaving home, how did you practice that homosexuality?
And I practiced so much I finally got it right.
I'm still trying.
Things like, I think 1978, I went to see Bette Midler at the Palladium.
Oh, wow.
I knew about her, I'd heard her, I think I'd seen her on television, and I took myself off to see her, and that was a transformatory experience. And there was, however many thousand people at the Palladium, gay men, a lot of guys in leather, a lot of clones, as they were called back in the day, with moustaches and check shirts, and this incredible,
overwhelming smell of poppers.
Yes, amazing atmosphere. It was a sort of religious experience, that. So that one, and I mean, I couldn't go out for a pint of milk without coming home with a husband.
How?
Well, not necessarily my own husband, probably somebody else's husband at that point. I had a wild time. I was young and beautiful, and it was the 70s.
So to be a good gay, you're saying you just have to shag a lot. Is that what you're saying?
It's part of it, isn't it? My hormones are raging.
This is where the practice comes in, yeah?
Yeah, obviously it's meant to happen, because otherwise we would not be permanently aroused, which I was constantly. I had to just sit on the tube going from Uxbridge to Harrow or wherever I was going, and the pheromones would be ricocheting around the Piccadilly line. I just couldn't help it. And I was a terrible flirt. And I still am when I get the chance.
Well, good. I think that we all should flirt more. I mean, in a consensual way, obviously.
Of course.
And so, there wasn't just your hormones running through you. There was this desire and passion for music.
Yes.
So what was happening there, and what were your plans?
So I was writing songs from the age of about 5. Some American friends left a beautiful grand piano in our potting shed, and I would just go in and found I could play. It was an extraordinary thing. And I've been playing ever since, writing songs ever since. So music and songwriting has always been the main thread. Playing the piano, I practice nearly every day and write nearly every day. And I created Miss Hope Springs much later on, where all that glamour and love of Hollywood that was stored up like the night storage heater was switched on and had an outlet like radiating heat. So all the love of Hollywood, Garbo, Dietrich, Piaf, Garland, Liza Minnelli, and creating a mask on my face as I did as a child, it all sort of came together in that.
So you say it came later. Like, how old were you when she was born?
Well, she was born initially in the 90s. Well, she was born, as I said, when I was painting my face when I was 10. The first time I ever really did drag was in the 80s, something called Kinky Galinky, which was a big club night. And I used to go to that. I was sort of a little bit part of that Lee Bowery crowd, on the edges, never been really one to be in the middle of a crowd. We always find me in a corner.
In the kitchen at parties, yeah.
That is absolutely me. And in New York, I did my first sort of photo shoot and film as a character I created called Gloria Constantine, who was a sort of silent movie star character. And drag was really in those days, an art form. It still is, but I think it was more nuanced and had more shades and kind of shadow than it does today. I'm more attracted to the shadowy side of it than I am the dressing up and the wigs and makeup and the extremes.
So what do you mean by that? Like that it's lost some of its edge? Well,
I think it's got a lot of edge. I think it's just a different kind of edge. It's a sharp edge, and I prefer a sort of gritty, dark saw, possibly, rather than a sharp, glittering, shiny, bright.
We're talking
thing.
a lot about violent weapons today. Things that could be used.
Well, all those things, yeah, they can also be used creatively.
How could a gun be used creatively?
It could be used in a creative way to
symbolize the phallus, yes.
Some effect. As trying to find a way to dig myself out of this hole. There we go with another very dark image. I am a very dark person. I mean, my sense of humor is extremely dark. I have extremely long, very dark spells in my life. And when I was a little boy, Roald Dahl was a friend of my parents and used to come to the house, and he would sit on my bed and tell me an ongoing story called The Rat Boy of Prague, which I don't think exists anywhere else, but he used to tell me about this little boy who was left alone by his parents and the rats brought him up. A bit like Home Alone, but again much darker. I can't help but have a very dark subterranean basement going on.
And I'm really sorry if I've given the impression that I'm knocking it. I am here for it. I'm not criticizing at all. I still want to better understand what you mean about the difference between drag now and then. And you've talked about like shadows and shade. Do you mean there was more like room for ambiguity?
I'm going to say maybe it was more theatrical, but in the true essence of theatre, not...
Oh, okay. Like a melodramatic way more.
Yes.
Okay.
Not the spectacle of fabulous costumes and amazing makeup, which they do now. And it's all very high octane, rather, to me, forced joviality. Mm-hmm. I haven't laughed once watching RuPaul's Drag Race when I've ever watched it. It just, it scares me more than anything. And the propensity to be vile and bitchy and unkind to people, that I just don't think is funny or necessary. I'll kill them, yes, but let's be nice about it. Going back to that running gag, I preferred the theatre of drag, which I saw in theatres mostly, it's become more of a joke, a light-hearted, frothy, very OTT, and not exploring the darker themes, the melodrama, the pathos, the tragedy that can be so well expressed in drag and through drag and under the umbrella of drag.
But do you not think that there's been an expansion of what drag is rather than a shift in direction?
Not really, because I'm not seeing the existence. It's almost like a thread, like humans and Neanderthals. And yet humans have now gone on, like the RuPaul Drag Race has become the thing. And that other thread, theatrical, more nuanced, darker, more melodramatic possibly, more serious possibly, saying important things, has been overshadowed, I think. I mean, I'm doing it. I'm carrying on with what I do. Neil Bartlett, the wonderful writer and director, came to see the show recently and said it reminds him of everything he loves about performance, because it is funny and it is silly, but it also is very tragic and very sad at the core. Maybe that's just what I like.
Because of... Okay, actually, let me ask you this then. If you were to describe Miss Hope Springs in 5 words, what would they be?
No, I'm not very good with maths, so I'm stalling more to try and figure out how many words is 5 words.
Just keep talking and then I'll tell you to stop when it's time.
I mean, it's one of the strap lines is a glittering glimpse of vintage Vegas, which is, it says something.
Yeah.
But she's
But and much like Vegas, does she have a seedy underbelly?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what she talks about. She gives you the glamorous showgirl, but she tells you the stories that most nightclub singers or chanteuses would not tell you. They'd hide them. They'd keep them maybe for their autobiography. But she tells you these things, about her husband Irving, and they lived together in a camper van in Dungeness, and her first husband Gianfranco the Hook Stampolides, who worked in pest control in the Pink Pelican Casino, and she says it didn't work out, the wedding, and his body was found in the concrete of the 405 freeway extension. And she said, it's terrible, I know, but a lot cheaper than divorce.
And so so this is one of the things that I'm always really interested in with drag, because I've never been a drag performer and never created a character. It sounds as though what you're talking about is that you kind of played around a little bit. You went to some events and you tried drag on. You created Gloria Constantine. And then Miss Hope Springs comes after that. Like, how did you know to abandon Gloria? And how did you know that Miss Hope was the one to stick with?
So interesting. I think it's like just finding a good idea, a really good idea that has legs, that you can flesh out, you can continue, you can give it life. It inspires you. I mean, sure, I probably could have done some stuff with Gloria Constantine, and you're giving me ideas now that maybe it's time to bring her back.
Dust her off.
But I think Miss Hope Springs, somebody said she arrived fully formed when she first came along, which was in the 90s. So I've been doing this a long time, although you would think I'd just started. Probably 30 years, it must be. So I've been at it a long time, and I've created Hope mostly to perform my songs. And so she gave me a great outlet for, I always say that I'm the studio, I'm MGM, and she's my star. So I go, what are we going to do with her now?
And why are you the studio and not the performer?
I'm both, but I'm more comfortable in a costume with a mask on. I can be myself. I can reveal more of myself, and I think the human condition by wearing a mask.
I find that fascinating. and I understand it, but I haven't got experience of that myself.
Maybe you should have a go one day. I'll be accused of like this is what the LGBT agenda saying you should try drag. It's the thin end of the wedge. You'll be a fully fledged homosexual by the end of it.
Yes, and I don't have my own autonomy, so I'll be swept away in this wave of queerness. Yeah, I understand.
Yes.
So we're here to talk about Madame JoJos. So what comes first? Is it Miss Hope Springs or Madame JoJos in your life?
Well, the name Miss Hope Springs, I think, came later than Madame JoJos. So I first went to Madame JoJos very late 70s, I would say early 80s, as a punter, would go with friends and go and see a show. This is back in the day when there was people like Ruby Venezuela, who was the big star there, and Venus Mantrap, I remember. It was a fabulous old-fashioned drag show. It was very glamorous. It wasn't crazily expensive. Madame JoJo was there. She used to, be in the house.
Madame JoJos is an actual person.
She was an actual person, yes. I think she was South American. She was lovely and beautiful and very glamorous and all you could possibly want from a nightclub venue hostess. That was my first experience going as a punter. Then in the 90s, I worked there. I was asked to join a new setup there.
Okay, so let's stay on the 80s for the time being. So, do you remember the first time you ever went to Madame JoJos?
I remember it visually.
Amazing.
I remember going in, how it looked, how dark it was, all that marvellous brass, Art Deco brass railings everywhere, a lot of red plush velvet. It really hadn't changed between the 80s and when it closed down.
So let's paint the scene then. So this is the early 80s. You moved to London in the late 70s, so you were in your 20s by this stage.
Yeah.
What was going on in your life?
I was back in the 80s. Yeah, I must say it was a little bit of a haze for various reasons.
With this hormones bouncing around the place. That maybe paints the scene enough, yeah.
Yes, I think it was hormones that did it.
And so, do you remember who you went with the first time you went to Madame JoJos?
I had a very good friend called Elena, who sadly passed away recently. I think I was probably with her. It was a crowd, a nightclub, fashion, and also a bit of a underground criminal subculture, I think, was hanging out there too.
Yes, because not to descend into lots of negativity, but also if you want to, let's just do that because I'm quite cool with it. Soho is quite different now from when it was in the 80s. What was it like? And what are the main differences? I mean, obviously, Soho used to be a lot more skeezy.
I think it was, and I think that's one of the reasons JoJo's doesn't exist anymore, is it was cleared out in about 2013, 14. That was it. 14 was the death knell, really, because I think there was some drama with a taxi driver or the cab rank or something, and there was, I can't get into the details, I don't know what the details are, but there was some violence going on between the people who ran the club and some cab drivers, and it got really dark, and then they shot Madame JoJo's just as a way of sort of trying to clean up the streets really around there. In fact, I was weirdly the sort of cadenza, if that's the word, or coda, is I was the last act on at Madame JoJo's before it was shut.
Oh, so okay. Oh, wait, let's hold that. Go back to this first night because we're still there.
Yes, we're there.
You've talked about remembering visually what it looked like, what it felt like to step into that space. What happened from there? Do you remember what adventures you got up to on that evening?
I can remember the very potent cocktail of various people. As I said, there were straight people there and gay people there were trans people there were drag queens there. And it was a real old school kind of nightclub setup. Of course, back in the day when people were smoking cigarettes, so the air was full of smoke. Then there would be the shows. And then I think we went to an after hours club. I remember them clearly, and they were really dives. Oh my God.
And when you say dives, is that a good thing or a bad thing? Or both?
This is bordering on the bad. This is bordering on the bad. Great because they existed. Marvellous because we had somewhere to go to carry on drinking. But what we were drinking would be quite another matter because...
The least questions asked, the better.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I might still be suffering from a hangover from one of those evenings out, in fact.
And over the years, you became more involved in Madame JoJos.
Accidentally, things would come along. I'd be asked to perform, be part of a new event, a new season with the different managers. Often they didn't really work. That people would be trying to do something different with the place, and it worked best with the old favourites. I think when Madame JoJo died, or stopped working there shortly before she died, if I'm right, I think it was her energy that really made it what it was. Mm-hmm. And after that, it was living on its past glories in a way, from its reputation and the name. It's a great name, great venue. It had built up a reputation as a brand in a way, but I just think it probably needed her to sustain it. Mm-hmm.
So why was it that you wanted to talk about Madame JoJos today? Why was that the venue selected?
I think because I have some history with it, and there's a tie through my life going back to my sort of earliest times going out in London. And I may have gone earlier to Madame JoJos, but it was definitely a long thread, from the early 80s right through to 2014. It's a big chunk of one's life and a happy little kaleidoscope of images and times and faces of people who are now long gone.
And so what do you think Soho has lost in losing Madame JoJos?
Well, surely it was a sort of lovely sequined pumping heart at the centre of it, and it straddled somehow the seediest aspects and the most underground aspects, and also the glamour of show business, even if it was in a small way, not big West End theatres. It was true cabaret boîte, as one might find in Paris or Berlin in the 20s. It had that energy to it, certainly steeped in the red plush velvet, I would imagine. So it's lost its heart, I think, in many ways. That maybe Madame JoJo's was a symbolic heart.
So if I were to ask you a really cheesy question about casting your mind back to that first night when you went there in the early 80s to Madame JoJo's, if you were able to give that version of you one piece of advice, what would you say?
Have more fun. Have more fun. As I said earlier, I'm the one you'll find standing in kitchens at parties or at the edge of a room. I've always had a natural kind of shyness to me. So I would be there absorbing it all and loving the decadence, but I would probably be in a corner watching rather than really, really participating.
So what does more fun mean then? Just throwing yourself into those situations?
Being less cautious, possibly, more open to meeting new people. I think I was then maybe more, but if I was going back, I would just say have more. Whatever you did, do more. Enjoy it more. Yeah.
Do you have any memories of Madame JoJos or clubbing from your own queer scene that you want to share? Well, if you do, I would love to hear from you, so why not get in touch? I want to create the biggest online record of people's memories and stories from queer clubbing. Visit me at lostspacespodcast.com and find the section Share a Lost Space to tell me all about adventures or misadventures that you may have gotten up to. You can also reach out to me on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, where my handle is Lost Spaces Pod. Find out more about Ty by following him on Twitter, where his handle is at Ty Jeffries Piano. Or you can visit his website, tyjeffries.com, or the website of Miss Hope Springs, which is misshopesprings.com. And the links will be in the show notes for this episode, so don't worry about scrambling to write this down. If you enjoyed this episode, I would really appreciate, and I know that sounds insincere, but I would actually really appreciate if you subscribed, took the time to leave a review on your podcast platform, or just tell other people who you think might be interested in giving it a wee listen. My name is Kay Anderson, and you've been listening to Lost Spaces.